the only UKIP MP in Parliament. Mr. Carswell, what do you make of this decision?
I'm pretty pleased. All the lawyers in London are not going to be able to stop us from leaving the European Union. The way ahead is now pretty straightforward for Theresa May to enact the will of the people. We need 2 votes, one in the House of Commons, one in the House of Lords. I would suggest that if either of those chambers attempts to veto the will of the people, well, we can replace the Commons with the general election, and we could certainly replace the Lords by creating 800 new peers. So I think the way for triggering Article 50 by the end of March, it's pretty straightforward now.
As someone who sees yourself as a champion of democracy, do you think this is the right decision, that this should go back to Parliament?
Well, it is what it is, and there's no point in me giving you my opinion on what I think it might have been the alternative judgments. I'm not a High Court judge. I think there is an issue of judicial accountability, and I think in the longer term, perhaps if Supreme Court judges are going to position themselves as guardians of the Constitution, we might quite rightly have a conversation about who appoints judges and who judges judges, but that's a conversation for another day. And I think some of the tone that we've had in the past has not been, frankly, conducive to a healthy liberal democracy. So let's accept this judgment. The onus is now on Parliament and the government to get on with it. People want them to get on with it. They now need to get on with it.
No, but I'm asking you whether you think the principle that this should be decided by MPs as a whole rather than by the government using the royal prerogative is right.
I accept the judgment. I accept that it's now for MPs to make the decision. But looking ahead, I think it's fairly straightforward. If for any reason members of the House of Commons in effect veto the referendum result, it's fairly straightforward. Let's exercise democracy with a general election and have a new House of Commons. I think that's fairly straightforward. I don't think that will be a problem. I know that the Labour Party and the leadership of the Labour Party is trying to frustrate the referendum result, but I think a sufficient number of Labour MPs realise that their electorate is against that. So despite the Labour leadership in Westminster being in favour of frustrating the referendum, I still think there will be a majority in favour of triggering Article 50 by the end of March.
No, but the inference of your comments about the Supreme Court dictating the Constitution and changing the way in which they're selected suggests to me that you are unhappy with what this Supreme Court has done.
Now, Adam, you've asked me this, and I'll give you the same answer. I accept the decision of the judges. The judges it's their job to make these judgments. They've made these judgments, and I think in a spirit of consensus, I think what Liz Truss said should be respected too. Longer term, there may be questions about judicial appointments. I know the Supreme Court is not appointed through the Judicial Appointments Committee, but the Judicial Appointments Committee itself, I think, is perhaps not as democratic or outwardly accountable as it should be. And UKIP will be publishing a paper in due course about reform of that process. But I don't think we should do anything other than accept the verdict today and now recognise that it's for Parliament, for those we elect, to make good on the will of the people. Let's not bash judges today.
Do you think there's any doubt that Mrs May will get this all through by the end of March?
I think so. I think there is a consensus in Parliament. There will clearly be some who are against it. And clearly there are some on the Labour front bench who want to try to frustrate the will of the people. But I suspect that with a majority in favour of leave, Theresa May will get her way. I think a bigger question mark is the House of Lords, where the House of Lords is in effect an oligarchy of people who've sucked up to various governments and been given peerages as a result. It's full of retired Sir Humphreys, the sort of people who got us into the mess called Brussels. The House of Lords will be intransigent. But I suspect that pragmatism and a willingness not to see 800 new peers created will perhaps encourage their lordships to come to their good sense.
Because the fact remains that the referendum was technically only consultative, and what we're now seeing is Parliament enacting something which is not consultative.
Well, we live in a parliamentary democracy, but, sovereignty of Parliament is, I've always regarded, and I think most people have always regarded, as shorthand for sovereignty of the people. And, if at the end of the day, if Parliament, the House of Commons, the House of Lords, decides that it wants to try to subvert the will of the people, we can always call a general election. I think fear of a general election will encourage quite a few MPs to come to their senses. Now, I know that the Labour Party leadership wants to try to prevent us leaving the European Union. The Europhile leadership of the Labour Party has for many, many years been signed up to the EU project, and they will do whatever to try to frustrate things. But I still think with the Conservative Party, with UKIP in the House of Commons, with Ulster Unionists, and with one or two Labour MPs like Gisela Stewart, who are very democratic and on the side of the people, I think there is a convincing majority to pass this act. Obviously, we need to see the legislation that David Davis's department has drawn up. But, once Theresa May is back from Washington at the end of this week, I hope she brings forward next week, if possible, this legislation. Let's have that vote and that debate as quickly as possible.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.